Good news for my ride.
All right, everybody. Before we begin question period, I'd like to encourage everybody to give a like on the channel, on the stream. It helps push it out further. Check to see if you're subscribed. If you're not, you might as well hit that button. And let's get into statements by members for a few minutes before question period begins.
Of the city's residents to make this event a real success. Ms. Mistersunshinebaby, the mayor of Blainville, dedicated a great deal of energy to mobilizing the citizenry and gained support among many partners. Blainville's candidacy for this event was remarkable, and I want to congratulate everyone for their work. We feel a great deal of pride for Blainville to have been chosen.
L'honorable député de Sherbrooke.
The Honourable Member of Sherbrooke.
Le 25 novembre dernier se tenait la
November 25th was the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, which also kicked off 16 days of collective action. This year's theme invites us to focus on the importance of investing in prevention. L'Escale de l'Estrie and the Sexual Assault Crisis Center in Estrie work tirelessly to help women gain power over their lives. I want to commend the dedication, passion, and commitment of these advocates who genuinely inspired me to amplify their message here in the House of Commons. There's much to be done, but I'm extremely proud to be part of a government that has committed since 2015 to ending violence against women with real measures to back it up. With new investments announced last Friday in Quebec, we will help women's shelters and crisis centers, in addition to investing in prevention and raising awareness among men. Let's work together to build a world where people don't die simply because they're women. Thank you.
The honourable member from Haldimand, Norfolk. Here.
The poor, the homeless, the abused, veterans, seniors, youth, adults suffering with disabilities, those suffering with depression and mental health conditions. These are among the most vulnerable in our society that are falling through the cracks of Canada's medical assistance in dying regime. They are the ones who will be at risk when the MAID laws in Canada are expanded in March 2024. Last year, death by euthanasia increased by 30% from the year before. Wow. Every day in Canada, 36 people use MAID to end their lives, which is the highest in the world. Last week, I hosted a forum with Canadians who were disturbed by the expansion of Canada's euthanasia regime to include the mentally ill. This expansion isn't about compassion. It's a betrayal of the most vulnerable. I call upon this government to reverse its course and instead provide help and hope for Canadians suffering with mental health conditions.
The honourable member from Malpeque.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This past Saturday, November 25th, marked International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women and launched 16 days of activism, which will conclude on International Human Rights Day, December 10th. It's a time to reflect, unite, and advocate for a world where every woman can live free from fear and violence. It also serves as a stark reminder that despite progress, countless women around the world still endure physical, emotional, and psychological abuse. Violence against women is a pervasive and insidious issue that knows no boundaries, affecting women of all ages, backgrounds, and social status. It ignores our shared humanity and creates barriers to achieving equality. It is a violation of basic human rights that demands collective efforts of all society. Let's use this time not only to raise awareness, but also to ignite action. Together we can build a world where every woman can live with dignity and free from the shadow of violence. It is a collective responsibility, and by standing united, we can and must eliminate violence against women once and for all. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
L'honorable député.
The Honourable Member for Saint-Laurent.
Monsieur le Président, aujourd'hui marque le 3e jour.
Today marks the third day of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, and I'd like to take the opportunity to talk about an issue that continues to plague us. In 2022, 184 women were killed violently in Canada, mostly by men. That's one woman or girl killed every 48 hours. Thousands of women and children are using women's shelters and services. And every night, around 300 women and children have to go back because shelters are already full. As a society, we need to do better. I want to say how much I appreciate the work of shelters who help women who are victims of domestic violence, and I especially want to thank some organizations that are making a real difference in my community of Saint-Laurent. Bouclier d'Athènes and other centers, and I want to thank all of those who work to save women every day. I want to extend them a big, big thank you.
The honourable member from Caribou, Prince George.
Mr. Speaker, suicide is a deeply personal issue which impacts us all. Years of hard work and advocacy are finally paying off. On November 30th of 2023, more than 1,000 days after the House unanimously passed my motion to bring 988 to Canada, and after relentless pressure by Conservatives and Canadians struggling with their mental health, we'll finally have access to a simple, easy-to-remember 3-digit suicide prevention hotline. This life-saving service will be open 24/7, will be staffed by expert crisis responders, and allow Canadians in their darkest hour to call or text 988 to receive confidential, immediate, and non-judgmental support. On behalf of the Conservative Party and myself, I'd like to extend a personal and heartfelt thank you to everyone who has been involved in the process of creating and launching 988. From the over 700 communities from across Canada who passed motions to bring 988 to Canada, to the crisis workers and the first responders on the front line, your efforts are going to save lives. And to those who are struggling with mental illness, know that you don't have to suffer alone. You are loved, you are valued, and your life is worth fighting for.
The honourable member from Toronto, St. Paul's.
Gender-based violence is not a woman's issue. Sally Armstrong urges us to stop making this a women's problem. It isn't. It's a men's problem. 10 years after the horrific attack at École Polytechnique, the Honourable Margaret McCain at the December 6th ceremony at Women's College courageously added that Marc Lépine had been physically abused by his father as a child. Hurt people hurt people. We have a moral obligation to prevent the preventable. Hurt people need timely access to trauma-informed, culturally safe, and evidence-based care. In 1991, Jack Layton and Ron Slusser, Michael Kaufman founded the White Ribbon Campaign. Today is the largest movement of men and boys to end violence against women and girls, promote gender equity, healthy relationships, and a new vision of masculinity. In response to MMIWG, Indigenous communities have led Moosehide and I Am a Kind Man campaigns. There will never be enough shelter spaces to prevent the plague of femicide until we see systemic and generational change that starts with confident and caring men.
Seems like there's a very specific topic to today.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians recently learned that a second battery plant, Northvolt, subsidized by the Liberals, will give hundreds of jobs to foreign replacement workers instead of unionized workers in Canada, jobs that should go to Quebecers. $7 billion in subsidies, taxpayers' money, was granted to this project, following news that Stellantis will be doing the same thing in its Windsor plant. Liberals first called it misinformation, then changed their story to say that there was only one foreign worker, before again referring to a small number. We now have confirmation from the company that at least 900 taxpayer-funded foreign replacement workers will be brought in to work at this plant. Now that we know that foreign replacement workers will be used at Stellantis and Northvolt, will the Liberals allow the same thing to happen at the Volkswagen plant in London? Enough's enough. The Prime Minister has forgotten that he needs to put Canadians first. The common sense Conservatives demand that the Prime Minister come clean and publish contracts for all taxpayer-funded battery plants.
The honourable member from Mission Matsqui Fraser River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After 8 years, this NDP Liberal government is just not worth the cost.
Hey everyone, if you haven't yet, hit that like button. Let's try and get to 100 or 200 likes if we can.
Your manufacturing facility in Windsor. This is the same facility that is receiving $15 billion in taxpayer subsidies after they threatened to close shop unless the government paid up. That's about $1,000 in additional debt for every Canadian household. The government sold the sweetheart deal as a win for Canadian workers and the automotive sector. But when the news first broke that taxpayer dollars were subsidizing foreign workers by the Windsor Police, Liberal ministers responded the number of foreign workers would be anywhere from one to a few to a very few people. We've now learned it's close to 1,000. Behind all the noise, we have a government that's lost its way and is afraid to admit its mistakes. Canada and Windsor are home to many skilled workers. People in Windsor and all of Canada know that taxpayer dollars should not be used to fund foreign workers. This government needs to release the Stellantis LG contract so Canadians can know the truth.
And I apologize to the member from Mission-Mascouche Canyon for getting the name of his riding wrong. The honourable member from Vancouver, Grenville.
Monsieur le Président, la violence liée aux gens.
Mr. Speaker, gender-based violence perpetuates cycles of fear and trauma, hinders social and economic development, and reinforces inequalities between men and women. Women and girls are often the first victims. But men and non-binary people can also be subjected to this type of violence. Our government's committed to preventing gender-based violence by promoting a responsive justice system and supporting victims, survivors, and their families. Awareness, education, and legislation play an essential role in promoting a culture of respect and equality. We all have
That's
to
the
work
thing, eh? Men usually keep quiet about this stuff when it happens to them.
An end to gender-based violence once and for all. I thank the member for Vancouver Grenville. The honourable member for New Westminster Burnaby.
Debate on Bill C-273 to protect children by ending legalized physical punishment of kids. Canada will join 65 other countries worldwide by adopting the bill. This is an important step. It would implement Call to Action 6 of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It's a start, but we can do much more in a country as wealthy as Canada. We support children also by supporting their families. Every child and everyone should have a home, a roof over their head at night. Every child and everyone should have safe drinking water, good safe schools, and great health care, including dental care and mental health supports. Children shouldn't have to worry about whether their family can afford medication that keeps their loved one in good health, or whether they or their family will have to go into debt for decades for them to go to university, or whether this planet will be burned beyond repair by climate change because no one took action. NDP believes that every child deserves love and support, and they deserve to be able to fulfill their full potential, and will continue to fight to build a Canada where every child matters and no child is left behind.
Here. The honourable member for Montarville. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to rise in this House today to mark the 40th anniversary of the Groupe Amical de Sainte-Julie, which was honoured on September 9th with a meal that reunited many of us with the volunteers who've worked for this remarkable organization over the last 4 decades. For nearly half a century, Groupe Amical has been dedicated to the well-being of Sainte-Julie's seniors, periodically preparing healthy, delicious, and comforting meals for them at modest prices while inviting them to get together to share them and take part in activities that definitely contribute to their social life. 40 years in the history of a people who've existed for some 400 years is nothing short of remarkable and deserves to be celebrated accordingly. Thank you to the visionaries who founded this group 40 years ago, to the volunteers who followed in their footsteps over the years, which allowed us to celebrate these 4 decades of exemplary dedication. Congratulations, and long live the Groupe Amical de Sainte-Julie and its members.
The honourable member from Yorkton, Melville.
After 8 years of reckless spending and sky-high carbon prices, Canadians are out of money, and this NDP Liberal government is out of touch. Last week's mini-budget just offered more of the same. The Prime Minister chose to quadruple his carbon taxes on gas, groceries, and home heating, and Canadians cannot afford it. Between April 2022 and March 2023, 5.9 million visits were made to Ontario food banks alone. That's an increase of 36% over the previous year, and the largest single-year increase ever recorded by Ontario Food Bank Network. This is in Canada in 2023. Common sense conservatives have offered real solutions. Bill C-234's carbon tax carve-out will save Canadian farmers $1 billion over 6 years. Lower costs for farmers means lower food prices for all Canadians. It's time for the Prime Minister to put Canadians ahead of his Environment Minister and above his politics. Canadian farmers have made it clear. This Prime Minister must stop pressuring his appointed senators to vote against C-234.
The honourable member from Hamilton Mountain.
Speaker, during my previous career, I spent many years covering murder trials, and I would say most of those were cases of violence against women. I cried with the families after difficult days of testimony when we witnessed horrific evidence, heard terrifying details, and listened to violent offenders try to justify their actions. I still get choked up when I share their stories. I still relive the horrors in my nightmares. 11 million Canadians say they've experienced intimate partner violence at least once since the age of 15. And it's not only the victims who suffer, it's their families, their friends, and the frontline workers who were there trying to help. In my role as parliamentary secretary, I've heard from these organizations across the country. Our national action plan to end gender-based violence provides $500 million to help prevent or address the cycle of violence. And so as these 16 days of activism get underway, let's all commit to do this work. Gender-based violence has to end.
Yeah. Oral questions.
Oral questions. Question was like, I'm the leader of the opposition. Smash that like button if you haven't yet, folks.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is spending $44 billion to subsidize 3 battery plants. $44 billion. That means $3 billion for each Canadian family. In Windsor, there will be 900 replacement workers, foreign workers, and in Montérégie, another group of hundreds of foreign workers. So can we see the contract for each plant to see how much taxpayer money the Prime Minister is spending on foreign workers? The Honourable Minister of Industry. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the opposition leader for the question. Canadians can see
the little chihuahua
where Conservatives stand on this. When he was employment minister, it wasn't 3,000, it wasn't 30,000, it was 300,000 manufacturing jobs in Canada. Stellantis will be investing $3.4 billion to build the largest battery factory in North America. We are investing to get jobs for Canadians. We will invest in Windsor. We will invest in the industry, and we will continue to work in our own workers, invest in our own workers. The Honourable Opposition Leader. He would be a good employment or labour minister for South Korea, Mr. Speaker. By the way, the Prime Minister said there would be no consequences from doubling the national debt. But in the economic statement, the government indicated that they'll be spending $52 billion. That's $3,000 per Canadian family in debt service. That's more being spent on debt service than on health. Why is the Prime Minister giving more money to bankers than to nurses? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, Canada has the lowest debt and deficit of all G7 countries. And we have a AAA credit rating. At the same time, we do have an economic plan that is responsible, that will enable us to make the necessary investments in the Canadian economy. We're building housing faster than ever before. We're providing dental care. We're providing early childhood care. The Conservatives just want to cut, but we know we need to invest in the Canadian economy.
Feed Ontario, a coalition of food banks, released staggering numbers yesterday. 800,000 Ontarians went to the food bank 6 million times. This is a 36% increase, the biggest increase ever. If the total number of people who visited a food bank were a town, it would be the 4th biggest town in all of Ontario, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister therefore cancel his plan to quadruple the carbon tax on the farmers who feed us and pass common sense Conservative Bill 234 to carve out the tax for farmers?
Sure. Yeah. The higher cost for farmers, the higher cost for us.
Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, we know that things are challenging for Canadians right now. That is why we are there for them, building more homes faster, providing dental care for children and seniors, cutting child care fees by 50% across the country. And you know what, Mr. Speaker? The only thing the Conservatives know how to do is cut, cut, cut. They would cut child care, dental care, housing. Mr. Speaker, that's not common sense. That is nonsense.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
That minister and the Prime Minister have imposed brutal cuts on Canadian families who opened their fridges to find nothing there. The report out demonstrates that in all of the last 7 years, Ontario Food Bank has gone up. And last year it went up by record amounts. 800,000 people went 6 million times to the food bank in this province. There's a bill before the Senate to take the carbon tax of the farmers who feed us rather than quadrupling it as the Prime Minister has said he will do. Will the Prime Minister stop interfering with the independence of the Senate and let the bill pass so that we can bring home affordable food?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, the Leader of the Conservatives is demonstrating this week that he just can't tell the truth to Canadians. So whether it's the Canada-Ukraine free trade agreement where there is no price on pollution, he can't tell the truth to Canadians what he is doing. Whether it is with regard to why he jumped to the conclusion that it was a terrorist attack, he can't tell the truth to Canadians. Whether it's with regards to misogynistic hashtags on YouTube, he can't tell the truth to Canadians. Mr. Speaker, we need to...
He has no misogynistic hashtags on YouTube. That's wild.
May I remind all members not to approach the limit of what would be considered parliamentary and to stay far away from that so that it is not impugned that a member is deliberately not telling the truth. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The truth is the Prime Minister wants to quadruple the carbon tax, including on our farmers. I have a farmer in my riding who's spending $10,000 a month on carbon taxes alone. All of that is passed on to the consumer. The consequences have been a record number of Canadians relying on food banks. 7 million Canadians are going hungry. 1 in 5 are skipping meals regularly because they can't afford the price of food. Will the Prime Minister get out of the way, stop interfering with the Senate, and let them pass common sense Conservative Bill C-234 to take the tax off the farmers who feed us?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just because the Leader of the Conservatives says something does not make it true, as we saw several times last week, whether it was with regards to how they voted on the Canada-Ukraine free trade agreement, perhaps why he blamed others for his mistakes when it came to how he jumped to a conclusion for a terrorist attack. And now what he's talking about with C-234, he knows that is patently false. And when it comes to food prices, that's because of the war in Ukraine and because of inflation. But Mr. Speaker, he cannot direct the Senate either. And unfortunately, his members are doing things that are threatening the democratic principles and rights of independent senators. That is shameful, Mr. Speaker.
Her poor kid, yeah. No doubt.
L'honorable député de La Prairie.
The honourable member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, in the midst of the housing crisis, StatsCan revealed that in just 1 year, rents rose by... Mr. Speaker. The honourable member for La Prairie. Could you start over from the beginning, please? Mr. Speaker, in the midst of the housing crisis, StatsCan revealed that in just 1 year, rents rose by 8.2%. Never before have rents risen faster than inflation. According to National Bank, the cause is unprecedented population growth. The chief economist says unless Ottawa lowers its immigration quotas, we don't expect much relief for households. Mr. Speaker, National Bank is not anti-immigration. They're saying there's a problem. Will the federal government finally admit it instead of insulting people's intelligence?
If you bring up any problems here in Canada, you're like racist, you're homophobic,
it knows full well.
You hate immigrants.
Controls its own immigration.
You can mention
levels.
problems without hating what's happening.
And to assume that the rental increases are purely caused by immigration, that's a bit rich. But we do think it's important to take into account settlement capacity, and that's precisely what we're doing. The honourable member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, if settlement capacity doesn't matter, then why stop at 500,000? Why not 2 million? Why not 10 million? But no, they stop at 500,000. So you see, they're telling themselves there must be a limit. There is such a thing as capacity. But their target of 500,000 doesn't take housing into account. We also know they didn't consult Quebec, so they're not factoring in health, education, enculturation, and language training and infrastructure. So if their 500,000 isn't based on that, what is it based on? A Ouija board? The honourable member, the honourable Minister of Immigration. It'd be nice to hear a serious question, Mr. Speaker. Let's have a serious question about immigration levels, Mr. Speaker.
Member from Vancouver East.
The housing crisis is escalating across the country. In Halifax, homelessness is on the rise. As winter approaches, urgent calls to repurpose empty buildings for affordable homes are mounting. Yet the Liberals are so out of touch with reality that they're delaying much-needed resources to get homes built till 2025. And under the corporate-controlled Conservatives, 800,000 affordable low-cost rental apartments were lost to housing profiteers to turn a bigger profit. As the winter turns, snow and freezing rain means people will die of exposure. Will the Liberals roll out the housing funds now to save lives?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I would like to thank the member for her very hard work on this issue and her concern. It's a concern we share. That is why, over the past few months alone, we have put in place measures that will lead to the building of more than 100,000 new rental units. That includes lifting the GST on all purpose-built rental construction. It includes adding $15 billion of financing to the apartment loan construction program. It includes another $1 billion for the Housing Co-Investment Fund for affordable housing. We need to build, build, build. That's what we're doing, Mr. Speaker.
Exactly. The Honourable Member from London Fanshawe.
A 45-year-old woman in London, Ontario, who works full-time and makes above minimum wage is living out of her car because this government failed to offer her affordable housing options. While the out-of-touch Liberals failed to deliver homes people can actually afford in their community, the corporate-controlled Conservatives sold off 800,000 affordable homes to rich developers when they were in power. Canadians deserve better. When will this government start building homes people can actually afford so they don't have to live out of their cars?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At the heart of everything that we do as a government is putting families first. The lady that was just referenced who is experiencing a difficult time, we're there. We continue to develop programs through the East Canada Child Benefit Program, through early learning and child programs. Mr. Speaker, we continue to ensure that we provide the support that is needed so that families across this country have what they need. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Foothills.
Last year, almost 6 million Ontarians visited a food bank, an increase of more than 40%, the highest single increase ever recorded. Clearly, this Prime Minister's carbon tax plan is not worth the cost. Conservatives have a common sense Bill 234 in the Senate, which will reduce costs on farmers and make food more affordable for Canadians. But the Prime Minister is blocking this bill, forcing Canadians to food banks. Will the Liberal Minister of Agriculture do his job? Will he defend Canadian farmers, phone Liberal senators to support Bill C-234 to have this car vote for farmers and make food more affordable for Canadians?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, we understand that it is absolutely essential today to be investing in Canadians, to invest to support families and to invest in an economic plan for jobs and growth. That is why we are building housing, because we are focused on supply, supply, supply. That is why we have an economic plan which has made Canada the highest per capita foreign investment destination in the G7. Meanwhile, Mr. Speaker, the only thing that Conservatives know how to do is cut, cut, cut.
The Honourable Member from Foothills.
Well, it's good to see the Agriculture Minister stand up and defend Canadian farmers. But if the Finance Minister's plan for Canadians is to cut meals, cut their heat, well, mission accomplished. Your carbon tax plan is working extremely well. But a common sense Conservative bill, C-234, will provide a carbon tax car vote for farmers and make food more affordable for Canadians. But the Prime Minister, as Environment Minister, has promised if this bill passes, he will resign. So is that why the Environment Minister is bullying senators in the Senate to block 234? Because he wants to save his job rather than ensure Canadians can afford to feed themselves?
Hey, man, that's the Liberal mentality. Get re-elected, or try to, instead of doing what's best for Canadians.
The Honourable Minister for the Environment.
Conservatives are chanting something, and he muted the mic again.
The Honourable Minister from the Environment, starting from the top.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservative Party of Canada should be ashamed of asking this question in this House after they directed their MPs to bully senators who disagreed with them. One of them had to apologize for bullying some of his colleagues in the Senate, Mr. Speaker. They should be ashamed of themselves. We're not telling senators how to vote. They're doing it, and they're asking them to bully other senators, Mr. Speaker.
Another question from Lawrence. Come on, Lawrence. Lawrence, you're next.
The Honourable Member from Dufferin-Caledon.
After 8 years, Canadians know this Liberal Prime Minister isn't worth the cost. Over 800,000 Canadians visited a food bank over 6 million times. 41% for the first time ever. The first time ever they had to do it is after 8 years of a Liberal government. Now that's not bad enough. If these 800,000 people formed a city, it would be the 4th largest city in Ontario, dependent upon feeding themselves at a food bank. This government could do something. Stop holding up Conservative Bill C-234 to take the carbon tax off farmers. Will they do it?
The Honourable Minister for Families.
Mr. Speaker, I've heard directly from Canadian families who are struggling to buy groceries. And on this side of the House, our government continues to make investments to support families through difficult times, investments in affordable housing, investments in early learning and childcare, and the Canada Child Benefit. The Leader of the Opposition continues to oppose these supports. His common sense, Mr. Speaker, is nonsense. On this side of the House, we'll continue to do all that we can to support Canadian families.
The Honourable Member from Dufferin-Caledon.
a Liberal minister who gets almost $300,000 a year, drives around in a limo, says that it's nonsense to talk about the 800,000 Ontarians who went to a food bank for the first time. This kind of conduct from these Liberals is disgusting. And there's an answer, there's a fix. They could tell their senators to stop blocking Bill C-234, which will take the carbon tax off farmers. You know, the people that feed us. But no, they're not doing it because the delicate sensibilities of the Environment Minister, who says, I'll resign if there's any more cuts to the carbon tax. Will they take it off? Will they pass C-234?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, we have trouble putting the actual facts on the table from the leaders of the Conservative Party of Canada. When it comes to working with the Senate is independent. There is only one party that is directing senators, and that is the Conservative Party of Canada. And as a member of Parliament from Ontario, he should recall the common sense revolution that not only cut services to education, to healthcare, to water, that led to deaths in Walkerton, Mr. Speaker. It was an absolute it was an absolute disaster. Mr. Speaker, Canadians know that their common sense is absolute nonsense. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
There are many experienced members in this House on both sides who do know that when a colleague has the floor, that colleague should be the only person who should be speaking. I ask you please to keep your comments to yourselves until you have the opportunity to take the floor. The Honourable Député.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, after 8 years under this Prime Minister...
Reminder, everybody, if you haven't yet, hit that like button.
...respect for a decision of the House of Commons. Bill C-234 was passed by a majority of us here. It's now in the Senate, but it's deadlocked. The Minister of the Environment is even filibustering and lobbying senators. Can the Prime Minister tell his minister to stop blocking the bill, respect the decision of the House, and let senators do their job and pass C-234? The Honourable Environment Minister. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to inform my honourable colleague that there are no more Liberal senators. There are Conservative senators. But we have appointed independent senators ever since we took office in 2015. So anyone who works with the Senate knows that those senators are independent. We don't give them their marching orders. It's the Conservatives who whip their senators. And it's unacceptable the way they're bullying and intimidating other senators. It's scandalous. It's unacceptable. I'd like to remind the member from Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier to please refrain from speaking when someone else has been given the floor by the chair.
Or he'll mute you.
Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, last week in the economic statement, it was clear that the Liberals want to radically increase the carbon tax, but Conservative Bill C-234, supported by a majority in this place, will create an exemption from the carbon tax for Canadian farmers. The Environment Minister says he's going to resign if it's passed. Maybe that's why he's been visiting with senators recently. Maybe he's going to go there after he resigns. Will the Prime Minister tell his appointed senators to put Canadians ahead of the Environment Minister and pass C-234 so Canadians can feed themselves at lower cost? Thank you. The Honourable Minister of the Environment. Mr. Speaker, after the Member of Parliament for Regina Capel took a photo of senators opposed to Bill C-234, independent senators, there had to be an investigation because those women were the subject of threats. We don't tell our senators how to vote, unlike the Conservatives, who not only tell them how to vote, but they encourage them to bully other senators. It's unacceptable, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker, the federal government has to reimburse Quebec for the $460 million in accommodation costs for asylum seekers, a federal responsibility. But to dodge blame, the immigration minister claims that this has suddenly become a shared jurisdiction with all the provinces. But it's not shared, it's federal. But more importantly, it's not shared with the provinces because Quebec takes in almost half of all Canada's asylum seekers. Quebec does all the work while the federal government twiddles its thumbs. And what's more, Quebecers, are they going to get stiffed with the entire bill? When is this minister going to pay up? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Instead of reading his lines, the member should read the Constitution to see that this is indeed an area of shared jurisdiction. This is often the problem in these debates between the Bloc here in the House and the Liberal government. I have a good relationship with my Quebec counterparts. We have a great thing going. The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. He was appointed as a minister. He has to be willing to debate these issues publicly. The minister says he can't come up with the $460 million to meet his responsibilities. So let's ask the finance minister then. Her colleague needs $460 million to do his part in taking care of asylum seekers. This money will allow us to continue offering housing assistance and social services, among other things. Will she pass a little bit of money on to her poor, broke colleague so he can finally live up to his responsibilities to asylum seekers? The Honourable Minister of Immigration. I think we need to drop the idea that the federal government is an ABM. It's clear that we have a relationship, a shared jurisdiction with Quebec. Quebec is doing its job, accommodating asylum seekers. We have regular meetings. We're going to talk privately to solve these issues as responsible governments do. The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Well, half of our taxes go to Ottawa. I think we have the right to talk about this. This is not shared jurisdiction. It's federal. It's funny. For years, the Liberals have been fighting Quebec's desire to repatriate all immigration powers. But now that it's time to pay a bill under their jurisdiction, they're not interested in immigration powers. When it comes to providing services to asylum seekers or paying the bill, they run for the hills, Mr. Speaker. Instead of running away, why don't they take responsibility, their responsibility for asylum seekers, and reimburse Quebec?
Quebec's always after more money, eh?
I'm answering basically the same question asked in a different way. I meet with my provincial counterpart every 2 weeks, and we will solve this in a responsible way.
Bill C-234 will take the carbon tax off propane and natural gas used on farm. 5 premiers, countless farm organizations, and farmers from across the country have asked the Prime Minister to axe the carbon tax and give farmers a break. The carbon tax on farmers is where food inflation and high grocery costs start for Canadian families. Will the Prime Minister and the Environment Minister stop interfering with the Senate and let the vote happen tomorrow?
The Honourable Minister for Agriculture and Agri-Food.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The truth is, my honourable colleague in his party does not even have a plan to address the environment, Mr. Speaker, and that is truly a reckless approach. But we as a government have a policy to address the environment, to deal with farmers and to make sure they stay on the cutting edge. For an example, in Winnipeg a couple of weeks ago, I announced $9 million, and with the provincial government in Manitoba and the Canola Council of Canada, we're able to put a program together to deal with the environment, to deal with keep farmers on the cutting edge.
This guy used to be the Veterans Affairs Minister, I think, and he completely wrecked it. And now he got shuffled.
The Honourable Member from Huron-Bruce.
That's an interesting answer right there, Mr. Speaker. This Liberal government has never respected the environmental goods farmers do. That's right. And they prove it every day by hitting Canadian farmers with high carbon taxes. One farmer in the Conservative leader's riding had an $11,000 carbon tax bill in 1 month. Wow. With the Liberal carbon tax, it's now cheaper for Canadians to buy food trucked from Mexico than from local Canadian farms. How's that right? How's that good for the Canadian consumer, the environment, or Canadian farmers?
The Honourable Minister for Agriculture and Agri-Food.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As I said previously, it's vitally important for any political party that's wishing to be empowered to have the environmental plan. We as a government have an environmental plan, and another example is dealing with the Minister of Agriculture in Ontario. We were able to announce $25 million a couple of weeks ago in order to make sure that farmers in Ontario are able to deal with the environment, stay on the cutting edge. We have and will continue to make sure farmers thrive in this country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Before I move to the member from Cypress Hills Grasslands for his question, I'd like to remind all members, in particular the member from Prince George Peace River, Northern Rockies, to please allow both
he always gets called out.
The questioner and the answer to ask questions. He'll have his turn when his name is on the list. The honourable member from Cypress Hills Grasslands.
That's funny.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it never ceases to amaze me how clueless the Ag Minister is about the real-life costs of agriculture. One reason is that ranchers buy their fuel at outrageous prices. One just showed me that his propane costs are over $1,500 per month. The carbon tax is a third of that cost. A quarterly rebate check doesn't even begin to add up to that much, let alone other costs for gas and diesel. Right. This is all a tax on growing our food, which makes it more expensive to buy the food. The Prime Minister needs to quit telling his appointed senators to block C-234. When will he back off so he can finally remove the carbon tax from all on-farm fuels?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I will remind the honourable colleague, Senate is independent and we do not direct senators, unlike the Conservative Party of Canada. But the real questions Canadians should ask themselves is why did the Leader of the Opposition direct his party to vote against the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement? Is it because there is a group of Conservative members of Parliament who are pro-Russia and anti-Ukraine? That's right. And they have to cover that for them? Is that what's going on? It's right-wing American extremism that's coming into Canadian politics?
American extremism.
Would have voted in support of the agreement. That's right.
Look at bobblehead in the background. What about democratic extremism? That's not a thing, apparently.
That's what a sinking ship looks like.
You like fries with that?
You like fries with
from
that?
Skeena, Bulkley Valley.
What is happening?
After a summer of record wildfires and drought, Canadians want a federal government that is serious about fighting climate change with the urgency that it demands. And yet we see climate pollution from the oil and gas sector going up year after year while its CEOs rake in record profits. The oil and gas industry can no longer be allowed to sit on the bench during the fight of our lives. Will the minister put a hard cap on oil and gas emissions commensurate with Canada's national target, or has the oil and gas lobby finally gotten to him?
The Honourable Minister for the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable colleague for his question and his advocacy. We will, as the Prime Minister said, publish before the end of the year the framework to put a cap on the emissions of the oil and gas sector, because he's right. These emissions have continued to rise over the years, while other sectors like agriculture, like electricity, like buildings have reduced their emissions. The oil and gas sector must do its part to fight climate change in Canada and to help Canadians with affordability. This will come before the end of the year, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from New Westminster, Burnaby.
Mr. Speaker, it's radio silence. We've been waiting for these regulations, and that's why the Environment Commissioner gave this minister a failing grade on the climate crisis. Meanwhile, the Conservatives don't even think there is a climate crisis. And the Liberals are just dragging their feet. When will the minister finally do something? When will he finally announce a cap on emissions in the oil and gas sector? The Honourable Minister of the Environment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to remind my honourable colleague that we are the only G20 country that has managed to reduce emissions 2 years before we had set out to do. And we have already set a reduction of 40% for the sector by 2025. We have created a carbon pricing system, and by the end of the year, we will have announced a cap on greenhouse gas emissions from the oil and gas sector. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Brampton South.
Mr. Speaker, gender-based violence is unacceptable and has no place in our country, including my hometown, Brampton South. November 25th marked the start of 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. This is a global campaign to raise awareness about ending violence against women and girls. This month, federal government stepped up by investing and supporting into implementation of the National Action Plan to end gender-based violence in Ontario. Could the Honourable Minister for the Status of Women and Gender Equality and Youth share the details of the National Action Plan with the House?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member from Brampton South for her unwavering advocacy in supporting women and girls. Gender-based violence has
Don't make fun of her accent in chat. Come on.
The national plan to end it is crucial. A plan in every province and every territory. Recently, the member from Brampton South and I announced $162 million to support Ontario through the National Action Plan. This creates a safe pathway for those who need it most. We now have 9 provinces and territories with agreements. I look forward to others in the coming weeks.
The honourable member from Battle River Crowfoot.
After 8 years of Liberal NDP policies being forced on Canadians, we see that this PM is simply not worth the cost. Recent reports show that food banks saw nearly 2 million visits in the last month. The tragedy is that this is a feature, not a flaw, of the Prime Minister's plan to quadruple the carbon tax on gas, groceries, and home heating. How high does the number of Canadians starving have to get before this Prime Minister gets out of the way and allow his appointed senators to pass common sense Conservative Bill C-234 and help farmers and ranchers lower the cost of food for all Canadians?
The Honourable Minister.
Let's get affordability back under control.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I've said before, we continue to look at policies and programs like the Canada Child Benefit, like early learning and childcare, and opportunities to support Canadian families when they need it. At every turn, the Leader of the Opposition continues to oppose this hard work that we are doing. His common sense, Mr. Speaker, is just nonsense. We will continue to do the hard work to ensure that we're there to support Canadian families.
The honourable member from Battle River Crowfoot.
Mr. Speaker, it sounds like that high-priced communications consultant certainly isn't worth the cost. The real nonsense is the rhetoric coming from the Liberals. Mr. Speaker, there is a real opportunity to lower the cost of food for Canadians, and it is in the name of common sense Conservative Bill C-234. It's a simple and pragmatic way to reduce the cost of food production on our farms. Will the Prime Minister put his ego aside and do what's best for Canadians and stop the pressure he is applying to his appointed senators that is keeping them from passing common sense Bill C-234?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, the nonsense needs to stop coming from the other side. When it comes to this bill in the Senate, it has been the Conservative senators that have been bullying and harassing independent senators, limiting their ability to participate.
It's a loose use of that word.
The RCMP is involved, Mr. Speaker. It is the Conservative Party of Canada that needs to stop directing senators. Let the Senate do their work as they were supposed to do. Mr. Speaker, we don't interfere in the Senate, but clearly the Conservatives do. That's right.
The honourable member from Tobique-Matiquac.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 long years of this NDP Liberal government, everything is up. Taxes are up, fuel is up, food is up, and Canadians are fed up but are still hungry. Now, in the midst of this affordability crisis, the Prime Minister has doubled down on his plan to quadruple the carbon tax. We as Common Sense Conservatives have brought forward Bill C-234, which creates another carbon carve-out for our farmers. Because we understand that when you tax the farmer who grows the food, you tax the trucker who ships the food, you tax everyone who buys the food. Will the Prime Minister finally back off, prioritize food security, and let his appointed senators pass this bill?
Yeah, let's get that under wraps.
With your permission, Mr. Speaker, I would like to read an extract from a CBC article from last week, and I read, 3 independent senators say they were bullied by Conservative leader in the Senate, Don Plett, and Senate security team are now also investigating outside threats directed at Senator Clement. I quote Senator Clement, Mr. Speaker. She said, threatening phone calls and online harassment at Clement after a confrontation with Conservative Senator Plett got out of control, that she feared for her physical safety and was forced to leave her residence and spend time weekend elsewhere in a secure location. That's what they're doing, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from King Vaughan.
If the 800,000 people who used Ontario's food bank last year were their own city, it would be the third largest city in Ontario. It's clear after 8 years, this NDP Liberal government just isn't worth the cost. Conservative Bill C-234 will remove the carbon tax for farmers, making the food prices cheaper. The Liberal Environment Minister has promised to resign. I hope he sticks to it. Yeah. Will the Prime Minister tell his senators to put Canadians first and pass 234 so Canadians can feed themselves?
The honourable government.
You can't live if you can't eat.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The premise of her question is false, first of all, because we know that this is a pattern of behavior that we're seeing from these Conservatives where they are not putting the actual facts and telling the truth to Canadians about how these things work. But let's be clear, in the Liberal Party, we have no senators in our caucus. The same cannot be true for the Conservative Party of Canada. And what we've heard is that not only are they directing senators, interfering with their independence, but their senators are also threatening independent senators, which is a clear pattern of behavior of their obstruction of democracy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's right.
Case in point. À l'ordre, s'il vous plaît.
Order, please. The Honourable Member for La Pointe-Lille. Mr. Speaker, $2 billion. That's the amount invested by the federal government to support English in Quebec since 1995. $2 billion to support the most dominant language on the planet. $2 billion for groups that are trying to anglicize Quebec. We will repeat that over and over again. Maybe the federal government will finally understand. French is threatening Quebec, not English. English doesn't need help or money. When will this government finally understand that it needs to stop funding the anglicization of Quebec? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, our government, for the first time, recognized that there was a decline in French in Quebec and that we need to support French, and we adopted a new official languages bill which the Bloc Québécois supported. And it's very tendentious to use these numbers when we're giving Quebec $500 to $700 million a year, and we have for 30 years to support Francisation, where we help Radio-Canada, we help Téléfilm, because on this side of the House, we support not only French, but French content. Thank you. The Honourable Member. Mr. Speaker, $2 billion to anglicize Quebec, and that's not it. Because in its action plan for official languages, Ottawa is planning to spend another $800 million on English in Quebec over the next 5 years. And that's all too familiar with these Liberals. They just don't care. They say that they recognize that the situation of English and French isn't the same and that they're worried about French, but when the rubber hits the road, they once again help English more by giving them $800 million. Why don't they use that money and use it to support French instead of anglicizing Quebec? The Honourable Minister of Transport. Mr. Speaker, as a Quebecer, we always need to promote and defend French. That's what we've done with record sums for official languages and the language of service and in the workplace in Quebec. As usual, the Bloc Québécois are looking to pick fights. They always seek to divide Quebecers from Canadians. Will the Bloc Québécois finally understand and accept one day that a Quebecer is a Quebecer, whatever their mother tongue?
The honourable member from South Shore, St. Margaret's.
Canadians are spending billions on taxpayer-funded foreign replacement workers on the new EV battery plant in Windsor. Windsor officials report that there'll be up to 1,600 foreign replacement workers. One Liberal minister said, oh, there's only going to be one. Another foreign minister said, just a few. Yet a third said, of course there's going to be foreign workers. The company said there'll be 1,600, no 900, no 1,600. So will the Liberals come clean, tell the truth, release the contract so all Canadians can tell what's going on here, since Liberals can't get their story straight?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let's set the story straight. Let's listen to Dave Cassidy, the president of Unifor Local 444 in Windsor, Ontario. Quote, we have 900 skilled trades working on the site today, 900. We're going to be going up to 2,000 trades. They tell me it's going to go up to about 2,000. That's also on top of what's going to be 2,500 unionized Local 444 members inside that facility. Listen to workers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from South Shore, St. Margaret's.
Notice he didn't say Canadian workers, and on top of that, the Minister of Industry said he's going to hold a meeting with the company to find out from the company what their plans are for the contract he negotiated and signed. I can't make this stuff up. He's got to ask the company what's in the contract he negotiated. $15 billion subsidy is going to cost every Canadian family $1,000 in taxes and leave Canadian union workers in the cold. So will they come clean, release the contract if they've got nothing to hide?
Well, obviously they don't want to do that. They've got something to hide.
For innovation.
Mr. Speaker, we'll take no lessons from the Conservative, Mr. Speaker. Especially
a little chihuahua.
his leader, imagine, Mr. Speaker, when he was Minister of Employment, that oversaw the loss of not 3,000, not 30,000, but 300,000 manufacturing jobs, Mr. Speaker. It's shameful, Mr. Speaker. With an investment of $3.4 billion by Stellantis, we'll be creating 2,500 jobs at the plant, Mr. Speaker. We're going to continue to invest in Windsor. We'll invest in our worker and we'll invest in our auto industry, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Essex.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister gave billions of tax dollars to subsidize a single battery plant. Now we learn that hundreds of the jobs linked to the plant will not be filled by qualified, local, unionized Canadian workers, but by taxpayer-funded foreign replacement workers. If that's not bad enough, now the Liberals are desperately fighting to keep the details of the contract hidden. Why? If it's such a good deal, what does the government have to worry about? Or did they actually sign off on giving billions of tax dollars without securing guarantees that Canadians would get the jobs?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, and I'm fairly certain, Mr. Speaker, that Dave Cassidy, the president of Unifor Local 444, speaks for his membership, which are Canadian workers. He said, this is nothing new. We go through launches like this all the time. This is nothing but political hay. I can't believe our politicians are playing this game and riling up thousands of people. This, he said, is the circus around politics. If Pierre had his way, these factories wouldn't even be built.
I would like to remind all members that even though they're reading a quotation, that you cannot refer to a member of the actual House aside from their riding name. The Honourable Minister.
Putting the libs in their spot.
Seconds left on the clock.
Speaker, I'll end the same way I ended before. Listen to workers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Pontiac. Mr. Speaker, the OECD recently recognized Canada as a global example for its national strategy to end gender-based violence. And one of the aspects of that plan is a better legal system. Not long ago, Mr. Speaker, a judge asked a rape victim during the trial why she couldn't just keep her legs closed. And the Conservatives at the time gave that judge a promotion. Could the Minister of Justice tell us about the progress that we've made since that Stone Age?
L'honorable ministre.
Je remercie la députée.
I'd like to thank the member for her question. Gender-based violence is an epidemic in Canada. We recently adopted Bill S-12, which will improve the National Sex Offenders Registry and which will give victims more power in the criminal justice process. We also adopted a bill to guarantee that judges will receive sexual assault training. We will continue to fight gender-based violence to ensure that all Canadians can be and feel safe.
I mean, fix the bail reform.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, nearly $50 billion taxpayer dollars to subsidize 3 battery factories. That's nearly $3,000 for each Canadian family. And we have learned that hundreds of workers getting that money will be foreign replacement workers. We expected that taxpayer money would be used to fund well-paid union jobs held by Canadians and Quebecers, but no. 900 replacement workers in Windsor, as well as hundreds at Saint-Basile-le-Grand and McMasterville. After 8 years, why has this Prime Minister failed to ensure that we'll have Quebec jobs in Montérégie? The Honourable Minister of Innovation. Mr. Speaker, Canadians watching us at home must be confused, Mr. Speaker, because what they see is that the Conservatives were against the Volkswagen investment, same thing for Stellantis and GM and Ford, and now they are also against Northvolt investment in Quebec. Mr. Speaker, with that $3.4 million investment made by Stellantis, we will create 2,500 jobs at the factory. And Canadian workers will build the factory. We believe in our auto sector, we believe in our workers, and we will move towards greater prosperity in this country. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Well, for the Quebecers watching us from their home, I will tell them that the Liberals are doing everything they can to hide the truth about the contracts. First of all, a Liberal minister said that there will only be 1 foreign replacement worker in Windsor, but then it turned into a handful. Then the police chief that there would actually be 1,600. Then we heard even more from CBC, which revealed that hundreds of foreign workers would replace Quebec jobs in Montérégie. This Prime Minister is just not worth the cost. I would challenge him. Will he make the contracts public, yes or no? The Honourable Minister of Innovation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, for people watching us, it must be very clear that the Conservatives are just not worth the risk. When the leader of the Conservative Party was Minister of Labour, no joke, 300,000 jobs in the manufacturing sector were lost in Canada. Not 3,000, not 30,000, 300,000. All Canadians know that we stand with them. With the $3.4 billion investment by Stellantis, we have created a strong battery industry. Up to 2,300 Canadian workers will build the factory. We believe in workers. We believe in Canada. The Honourable Member for Montmagny-Lise-Lés, Kamouraska-Rivière-du-Loup. Mr. Speaker, we've learned that this government used $15 billion of taxpayer money to fund foreign workers in Windsor. And now we've learned that Northvolt in Quebec will also need hundreds of foreign workers. This is $7 billion of taxpayer money. The Liberals said that there would just be a few of these workers. Oh, yeah? Well, no, now we're hearing about hundreds. We need to know the truth. Mr. Speaker, this Prime Minister has failed to protect Quebec jobs. It needs to make the contracts public. When will it finally do so? The Honourable Minister of Innovation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And for those watching us at home, they'll say, well, the truth is simple. Thanks to our government's hard work, we have the highest level of private investment in the history of Quebec. For once, Canada is doing well in the auto sector. Everyone in this House should rise in order to cheer the fact that Quebec is now a big part of the auto industry. We will have a battery industry in Quebec. Mr. Speaker, we should all be proud of what Quebec and Canada is capable of doing. Let's be proud, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Scarborough Agincourt.
Mr. Speaker, this past Saturday was the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. As the mother of 3 young men, I raised my boys to be respectful of women and to recognize that eliminating gender-based violence is an issue for all people, regardless of gender. Can the Minister for Women and Gender Equality and Youth please provide an update on how we can raise boys and young men to be champions of women and support ending gender-based violence?
Pretty big reoccurring topic today.
Thank you to the member from Scarborough Agincourt for this most important question. The fight to end gender-based violence won't end unless men and boys are involved. And since we launched the National Action Plan to end gender-based violence, we have funded organizations such as White Ribbon, who work every day to make sure that men and boys are involved in this fight. Mr. Speaker, gender-based violence must not and will not be tolerated. All of us can make that a reality.
The honourable member from Nunavut.
The federal housing advocate says this government fell short in building homes across the country. Under the Liberals, too many Indigenous peoples everywhere, especially in cities, are homeless or sleeping in overcrowded houses. They have failed to uphold Indigenous peoples' basic rights. Thanks to the NDP, this government announced $4 billion over 7 years for housing, but the Indigenous peoples are still waiting. Why have they not released all of this urgently needed funding to respect the Indigenous peoples' rights to housing?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, and I thank the member for her question, and I thank her for her advocacy on this and many other issues in the North. We agree with the findings of Canada's housing minister that Canada's colonial history is the absolute cause of the oppression of Inuit, as well as First Nations and Métis. And that's why we are on the road to reconciliation with our Indigenous partners. We have invested hundreds of millions of dollars for housing in Inuit Nunavut, but we know there's more to do, and we'll keep doing it in the spirit of co-development, in the spirit of reconciliation.
The honourable member from Kitchener Centre.
Mr. Speaker, while other countries get set to up their climate ambition before COP28, Canada is getting singled out for the massive gap between our words and our actions, and the federal government's Home Energy Retrofits Grant Program is running out of money. The Greener Homes Grant Program could easily be funded and expanded simply by taxing the record-breaking profits of the oil and gas industry. Will this government expand the successful program to support Canadians struggling with the rising cost of living?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, transitioning the way people heat their homes is important not only for the environment, but it makes life more affordable for people. It's why it's so important that our government actually created the Oil to Heat Pump program, which is helping people right across our country who rely on oil to transition to heat pump heating. That's going to reduce their bills going forward. But more than that, the Greener Homes Grant has been amazingly successful. It has been wonderful to see so many Canadians take advantage of this program, and I agree with him. That is a very important part of what
pump, yeah.
And so comes to an end another question period.
All right, folks, that's where we're going to end today's question period. I'd like to encourage everybody, if you haven't yet, hit that like button, subscribe, and I will see you the same time tomorrow.